My name is Jason.
And my name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we'll while away the hours, trampling the flowers, in the Stygian garden of Abelia Prem.
Our first segment is the basic crawl.
The Stygian Garden of Abelia Prem is a 30-page OSR scenario written and laid out by Clint Krauss, edited by Catherine Richards, with cover art by George Coltronis, interior illustrations by Marcin Skilny, and cartography by Todd Gamble. From the text. Abelia Prem was a peculiar woman. Born to a wealthy merchant family, she grew up with no desire unfulfilled. However, she did not inherit her family's lust for wealth. She had ambitions to be a scholar, a traveller, and an explorer of unknown places. Throughout her life she studied, remaining bookish and reclusive, while her siblings engaged in the more typical mating rituals of the idle rich. When her parents left her a sizable inheritance, she built a secluded manor, a sanctuary of intellect, away from what she saw as the crass, banal world around her. Her gardens were considered the most extraordinary in the region. Her study of horticulture continued well into her later life, when she developed an interest in rare and hybrid species of plants. And this interest eventually led Abelia to discover a most interesting legend about the rarest flower of all, the Stygian rose.
The book begins with a section on designer's notes, and then we get the background information, an abbreviated version of which Tom just read for us. Following that is a section on rumors, and from there we have a maps section, including maps of the manor ground, interior maps of the manor house, and a 3-level Stygian garden dungeon crawl. After that, we get the actual text of the keyed locations from the maps. In total, it's 51 keyed locations. Some highlights include a dining room filled with giant spiders, the Green Woman, a statue that puts people into a magical sleep, the ominous Druid's Grove, and the strange tree the other trees stand sentry around, the Verdant Grotto, featuring the excellent Grandfather Toad, the Fairy Cages, which is a room filled with thousands of frog corpses, don't ask, and an underground river that may or may not be the boundary between the land of the living and the land of the dead. Following that, we have a couple of appendices. The first is about Abelia Prem's plants, and then the next is a bestiary. Then we have an interesting section called the Crimson Page, which is a mostly blank page for monster stat notes. There's another section called In Memoriam, which is where we record the souls claimed by the Stygian garden, name, class level, cause of death, that sort of thing. Finally, in the PDF at least, there's an advertising page for Vacant Ritual Assembly Zine, which has a throwback Dragon magazine-esque quality that I really enjoyed. Let's go to our bona fides. Tom?
I ran this as a one-shot mission for Stay Frosty, the game of science fiction Space Marines in trouble. How about you?
I always love the Stay Frosty episodes.
Well, here we go.
It's an interesting perspective on the dungeon, to be sure. I ran this as part of my Company of Salt and Iron campaign, which we discussed in a previous episode. Things we liked about this, high-level presentation things, everything's very clean, easy to navigate, I thought. The layout, fonts, graphic design, refreshingly simple in this day and age.
It's now, of course, this is a bit of an older title now, and I think it was in a period when this was sort of the vogue, but even then, I don't think we can say that the authors, or in this case the layout artist, which is the same guy, they're not copying other people. This is a decision that he's made, and it's really good. It is, as you say, easy to navigate, nice clear headings, cannot complain about that. I found it really easy to use in play, which is not always the case.
I love the very modern OSR trend of really hyper-stylized layouts, the Morkborgs, the Crown of Salts of the world. It's appealing, and it definitely draws you into the vibes of the module. But sometimes it's nice to get back to something that's just easy to read.
Yes, that's true. And also,
it's just very simple.
Yeah, and also in this case, of course, the background, the unseen antagonist is Abelia Prem, a bookish, quite fastidious person who probably would favour a serif font herself.
So I think that's probably right.
Fine. And the maps, by the way, Similarly well laid out, I thought. Easy to use.
Love the maps.
You like the maps, right? Yeah.
I love it when the creator of the maps or the creator of the module has in mind that these maps are going to be used a certain way at the table. And in this case, we get both a referee version and a player version of the Manor Grounds map.
So good.
To be honest, they're only subtly different, but they're different in really important ways. And my play group loved it. Apart from the fact that the Manor Grounds map is just really nicely rendered, it just looks great. I was able to say to the players, okay, everything that's on this map, you can see it. It's all within eyesight.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah, I was like, your landing craft drops you off here, and this is what you can see. Mm-hmm. And there was a brief discussion about the scale of it because they had a tank. But apart from that, and it was, you're right. You can point at things on the map, and they're all indicated purely through visuals on the player map, especially. That's really important, I think. You can see a bit of like, oh, there's a weird statue over there that looks intriguing, but we can't quite make out what it is because unlike the GM, we haven't read the scenario. But at the same time, when you have read the scenario, when you are the GM, you look at that and it's like an icon for you. You recognize, oh, this is the statue of the weird giant. This is the undergrab bit. And that's the perfect balance of the iconography, which is what you really want. Great stuff. Good maps.
I don't want to jump ahead too much in the discussion, but one thing I found really interesting when I ran this was over many sessions because it was part of Westmarch's thing and the characters come and go as they wished. When I ran it, I intended for whenever they were there for it to have like the feeling of it's a bright sunny day, it's warm, there are insects buzzing, there are plants growing everywhere. It is a languid kind of experience. And something about the map really dovetailed nicely with that. It was like, go at your own pace. Here it is. Wander about as you wish. There's no pressure. This is just a lovely afternoon exploring this place.
Yeah.
And the maps really kind of helped with that a lot.
Yeah.
I also really enjoyed the dungeon maps. They were very clean, but with a surprising amount of fine detail. It was a good balance of fine detail on the maps with a clean, easy map. It's not just a squares floor plan. It has actual objects in the map as well. Yeah. And also very easy to use and play. Let's get to the more of the subject matter here. Well, as I've kind of noted already, I think the vibes are great in this adventure.
Yes.
This is a full daylight horror scenario, which is something we talked about 100 years ago on this show. And this is such a great example of a dungeon that does the full daylight horror thing really, really well. Everything just feels so languid, so idle. There's a thickness to it, if that makes sense. I don't even know what I mean by that necessarily.
I do know what you mean. Yeah, I think so. It has this sort of abandoned stately home atmosphere to it, which is carried throughout the whole scenario. Obviously, in my case, that was under a dome on an asteroid, but the point still holds. And
yes, dude.
And I think that was absolutely vital to the success of, at least when I ran it, because I think this kind of slow point crawl really lives and dies on atmosphere, especially one like this, which, as we'll discuss maybe a bit later, doesn't have too much going on in terms of, oh, here's the plot, or here are the factions that you're going to meet in the dungeon.
Right.
It's not about that. It's like a sort of, it's almost like, this is going to sound like an insult, but it's not meant to be. It's like a walking simulator dungeon crawl, right?
Yes.
And because of that, it's vital that all the things that you're encountering they're nice. There's a beehive, there's a carefully crafted hedge, there's a nice stately home, but it's abandoned. It's not like rotting and horrible. Like, that's a different kind of vibe. There's a different kind of daylight horror. This one is just gently left abandoned, like the Mary Celeste or something, you know?
Right, yeah. No, that's the exact right vibe, and it feels that way in play. The dungeon crawl, I thought, at least the part starting from the atrium, you enter through the atrium and then you go to this subterranean level, and that's where the dungeon crawl is. There's another way to access the dungeon as well, but my characters mostly went through the atrium. The whole thing has a really great sense of place. I think the atrium and the dungeon crawl in particular has a really fantastic sense of place, because something that we have sometimes criticized dungeons for, and I think is a common criticism of dungeons, is they just feel like a hodgepodge assortment of traps and monsters with no real ecology or logic to any of it, especially the older dungeons. But in this one, everything feels like this is Abelia Prem's passion. This is her thing. These are the things that she was into. She loved statuary. She loved weird plants. She loved experimentation. And even though it's never like explained explicitly why some of these things are in the dungeon, you know it's because Abelia Prem was just doing her research and being a weirdo, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's a reflection of her personality, which I think we'll talk about a bit later as well. I mean, for me, actually, I think you're right in terms of outright game design. Maybe the dungeon crawl part is the strongest part. But I felt in terms of sense of place, I liked the grounds a lot. Just the garden, because that's above ground. It's sort of hinting at what's going on with Abelia Prem, but never really spelling it out. So that's a good point. It has the themes of statues and cultivation, and it's only when you go below ground into her inner sanctum that you discover like really what she was up to. But that's actually, it's a good point. I think it goes from like the house, I suppose, is almost like a cover for her. It's the Wayne Manor of her Batman story, and then it gets more and more like personalized to her, right, as you're exploring her backstory as you explore the dungeon.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. What did you think about the bestiary?
I liked it. I will say a minor, one of those things, I don't know, maybe I was just a bit tired that afternoon. There were a couple of times I could have done with a bit more than just the evocative names, like the grotesque spouter. But overall, it was good. And actually, I blame the players, because sometimes I would sort of say something and they'd be like, what do you mean? Can you describe it in more detail? And I'm like, what? It's a dandy buzzard. What more do you want me to say? But yeah, there's some tremendous ideas in there, and I don't quite... What I like about them is that I can't really explain them. I definitely have an image in my head, but I cannot explain it.
I ran into a similar situation. I really like the bestiary, but I do think you have to come to it ready to add some detail and add some twists. For one thing, I found the bestiary to be... There are maybe 4 or 5 really good monsters, top choice fun monsters, and then there's a few that are not as exciting, and I sometimes found myself pawing for like a cool monster in a moment, right? I really wish I had something here.
I think the stronger ones, I feel like, are tied to locations. The one that creates the gargoyles is actually in one particular room, and so on.
The Stone Mother, yeah. There are some fantastic ones. I'm going to talk about the Buzzard Dandies in the Chain Lightning round. Okay. And I love the Stone Mother. The Stone Mother is this incredible encounter, but it's a set piece encounter. You can't have the Stone Mother everywhere.
Yeah, she can't keep showing up.
Or Grandfather Toad, this ancient giant toad. He's in one place, So there's a few really good location encounters, but then I kind of wanted some better wandering monsters.
Yeah, you were a bit stuck with just the cherub statues, which were cool. I liked them. I wanted another one. I use the
cherub statues a lot. Yeah. But all in all, though, I thought the bestiary was quite good. Anything else you want to say about things you liked about?
Yeah, I do want to talk about the location entries, actually. I think they were very well written to have sort of a mix of brevity and evocative writing, mostly like striking the right balance, and a good inclusion of information written from an in-universe, in-character perspective for you to hint at or telegraph what's happening. So, for example, there's one description that tells you, and I'm going to quote now, "The balcony is spotted with a number of small irregular holes, and several of the rails are missing, apparently burned or melted off." And that's a warning sign for the players to think about what that might mean. And the reason for that situation is because, and I quote, "Anyone spending more than a few moments here will draw the attention of a grotesque spouter who roosts just above on the edge of the roof and will remain on the roof and unleash its acid spout at any unfortunate souls below." So it's just these nice sort of, it doesn't spell out it's been aciding the stuff away. It just tells you, it's sort of non-boxed box text, if you know what I mean, like little phrases for you to throw in there. Yeah, it's good. Yeah. And finally, I do think it's rather good to have a couple of pages. Is it the Crimson page, which is just a notes page for monsters? So what you would do anyway, but they've given it a fun name.
Touch.
Yeah. And the in memoriam, and record your deaths. That's great. That's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. Yeah. I was wondering if they were just trying to fill a page count or something.
Absolutely. But it's fine.
Yeah. But they went to the trouble of making a border and formatting it and stuff. Yeah. So, yeah.
Appreciated.
Let's go to questions we had. We both have a couple of questions. They're kind of somewhat connected questions. Funnily enough, I think I've answered my question as we've been discussing the module,
okay,
but I will pose it anyway. My question was, I found the manor house itself, the actual manor house, I found that to be quite boring. There's nothing to do in it. There's basically 2 encounters and a lot of empty rooms. I think maybe it felt like more of an acute problem for me because I was bringing multiple groups over multiple sessions, little short sessions into it. And if they chose to go search the manor house, I was scrambling for them to have something to do because they've only got an hour and I don't want their hour to be occupied by going through empty bedrooms. I had that issue with it. On Measure, the adventure is much more fun when you're on the manor grounds or you're in the dungeon. The house itself is quite dull. So I want to get your thoughts on it. But also, I kind of feel like we've answered my question a little bit, or my concern, which
is... It is sort of a decoy, yeah.
I think that's the purpose.
Yeah.
Or like Abelia doesn't care about the trappings of her idle, rich life. So here's this empty house.
I suppose it's that. And honestly, you're the better one to answer this because my group, they very quickly zeroed in on the idea that we've got to go and investigate the possible entrances to underneath. I'm not sure why they thought that, but they were correct. So they didn't look at the house, and I was kind of looking at the house, but thinking, oh, should I try and persuade them to go there? And to be honest, I came to the same conclusion from a read, which was, there's not much there. It's fine if they don't go there.
Happily, if you're searching the manor grounds and you don't go straight to the house, there's lots of things that pull you underground, right? Yeah. Like the Druid's Grove has the big hole in the ground with the Dryad tree inside of it. The atrium immediately sends you underground. So if you make a beeline for the house, I think that's maybe more of an issue. Yeah. But no, I think you're right. I think it's meant to be a decoy, and it also maybe says something about Abelia. What was your question?
My one is... I think maybe this scenario does not have enough people to talk to. It has one fairy that you can maybe communicate with.
Yeah.
And I think that might be it, actually. It's a great
encounter for what it's worth.
Oh, it is. It's very disturbing. But it's... And I think in hindsight, what I should have done, because of course I was running a science fiction version, would be to have the house and the grounds have this sort of GLaDOS-style security computer that was still active, but a bit off-kilter, that would greet the PCs and talk to them and maybe threaten them and give them unreliable information.
Or it could be called Abelia, but it's spelled in a techno-future way.
With like a three instead of an E. Yeah, that would have been good.
An E, yeah, exactly, yeah.
But I should have given them someone to interact with that wasn't just themselves. I don't know, how did you find that for your version of it?
Because of my format, it wasn't a problem. I had groups that only had an hour. They were only in it for an hour, and there's plenty to do.
No time for chit-chat.
So, yeah, no time for chit-chat, yeah. And they get so little opportunity to do in-character role play with each other that any kind of chit-chat they want to do is with each other. So it was, for my format, it was not a big deal. I could see that, though. But also, there's something interesting to me about the languid emptiness of it.
Yeah.
There's something appealing about that to me. Like, not every adventure has to have chatty stuff. It could just be this heavy, tired, languid thing, right? Where no one wants to talk about anything. We're just looking at statues and trudging through vines and stuff. So go. Well, with all that said, let's go to the chain lightning round. Tom.
Disturbing these flowers causes them to release clouds of psychoactive pollen into the air. The victim will hallucinate the statue of the huntsman coming to life and firing stone arrows at the party.
The Green Man. Here sits a massive 12-foot-tall, lifelike statue of a bearded man. The figure is crouched upon a raised bed of stones. Its gaze is fixed solemnly on the ground. The entire figure and its base are covered in patches of brown lichen. A careful search will reveal that the statue's right hand is articulated at the wrist. Twisting it will cause a handful of miscellaneous seeds to pour from the statue's mouth.
This chamber has a horrible, swampy odour. The floor is covered in thousands of dead frogs, and a handful of living ones.
The Songbird Conservatory. 30 opulent, velvet-cushioned chairs face a row of 7 large gilded bird cages against the wall. Each cage contains the remains of 2 long-dead songbirds.
If the seeds of the Green Ladder are planted in ground that has been consecrated by thundercloud druids, they produce strong vines that immediately and perpetually grow toward the sky. They never stop growing, stretching all the way to space, or whatever is beyond the sky in your campaign world.
The Buzzard Dandies.
Yay.
Yay. 6 wizened buzzard dandies are perched in the branches of an old willow tree. Each buzzard wears a frilly gentleman's collar around its neck. One wears a golden monocle. Yet another wears an ill-fitting powdered wig. The buzzards will attack anyone who carries obvious valuables or finery. They are covetous of jewelry, wigs, and fine textiles, and will kill for them. However, if even one buzzard is killed, the rest will fly away in cowardice. Let's go to the expert delve. Hey listeners, Jason here. I want to let you know about a brand new show. It's called the Gauntlet Podcast 2nd Edition, and it's an exploration and celebration of the indie tabletop RPG scene. The show is called 2nd Edition because it's a reboot of the old Gauntlet podcast, but also because in this new format, my co-host Wes and I are looking back at a classic indie RPG and then talking about what we would do if we were making a 2nd edition of that game. As of this recording, we've already covered Dance of the Damned, The Sword, the Crown, and the Unspeakable Power, and Dogs in the Vineyard, and we have plenty more in the pipeline. Wes and I will also be chatting with folks both in and outside the Gauntlet community about different gaming-related topics, such as fandom in TTRPGs, the effects of the Satanic Panic in the early 80s and 90s, genre in games, and much more. The Gauntlet Podcast 2nd Edition is a Patreon exclusive. We've created this show for the ride or die Gauntlet fans who support everything we do on Patreon. There will be a new episode in the Patreon feed every single week, and you can get exclusive access by making a $2 or higher pledge. We're at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks. It's the Expert Delve. Periodically, listeners, Tom and I do an expert delve about a specific adventuring environment and what makes adventuring in said environment intriguing, fun, and particularly applicable to a fantasy adventuring context. Today we're talking about gardens. And when I was thinking about this, Tom, I kept coming back to this question. And I think the answer to the question is a good springboard for, one thing, everything in our notes, but also, what are we talking about here? And my question I kept going back to as I was thinking about the topic was, why have a garden at all?
Yes.
That question was really pronounced in my mind. Maybe you have a garden for food. Okay, but you don't need a garden to live off the land. You can forage. Or maybe you have a garden for beauty. You don't need a garden to enjoy the beauty of nature. And so the question is, why a garden, Tom?
Yes, I was thinking about this. There's something weird about gardens, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we mentioned in talking about the Stygian garden of Abelia Prem, well, including her manor and the manor grounds, is that it's a reflection of her personality.
Right.
And so a home is always reflects the person who lives there. But everyone needs a home, so that's just like a thing you're going to have.
Right.
However, keeping on making or creating a garden, that's an active choice that you take.
Yes.
And I put it to you that the very act of creating one is a signifier of hubris and wanting to exercise control and dominion over the natural world. Discuss this in your Philosophy 101 classes. It's yes, there's something about it, isn't there? It's the idea of controlling nature, and even in when, because sometimes you have gardens that are designed to look like they're quite wild, but even then, you're doing it on purpose. You're controlling how wild it actually is. And that, I think, is... There's something about that. There's a weird tension between the two things. It is, let's all say it together, a liminal space between two spheres of existence. Civilization and the wild. And I think that's why it is an evocative adventuring space. The same reason a dungeon is interesting, I think, possibly, or like the subterranean thing is, again, it's... And especially why dungeons are more interesting than caves, I think, traditionally for role-playing games, for adventures, because it's not a natural... It's not like you've found a cave and you've moved into it. That appears in dungeons. But it's you've dug tunnels, often very regular square tunnels, into the very earth. And a garden is a bit like that, but above ground, Yeah. I mean, what do you think? What were your notes on this?
I love the idea of the garden as liminal space, this space between civilization and nature. I think that's really interesting. That's a really intriguing idea. A sort of weird thought I had when I was thinking about this as liminal space. I was thinking about that ancient Greek idea. There's a word for it, and I don't remember the word for it, but it's this idea of we build cities and we build civilization in order to protect ourselves from all the gods in nature.
Ah.
There are spaces which are essentially threshold spaces between the realm of the gods and civilization, like an underground river or some particular forest glen. In this place is the threshold. And I almost kind of like the idea of the garden as like a weird inversion of that. We're taking this idea of nature as a place of the gods, as a mystic place, as a mythic place, and we're boxing it all up, we're boxing it all up, we're keeping it all tight and bounded so that we can control it. I find that super interesting. This idea of liminality is explored quite a lot in this module. If you look at the beloved buzzard dandies, right? Like the buzzard dandies, they exist at the intersection of being fauna and but they're civilized fauna, right? They wear wigs and jewelry, right? I really love the way that statues are treated in this module. It's not something we talked about much.
No, that's true, but
in our basic crawl.
But yeah, the stone mother, for example, it's a source of life, but it's made of stone. What's up with that? That's like inherently contradictory, right? Yeah.
It is, it is. Or like just the idea that the statues are caught in a liminal space in a way because they're statues, but they can sometimes move,
Yeah.
I picked up on this idea of the garden as a liminal space when I ran it. And I made one of the bestiary entries, the granite knight statue. I actually made it so that those statues, they were a little bit like weeping angel statues from Doctor Who. And when they touched you, they actually transported you to a pocket dimension, a literal liminal space where you had to fight them in their flesh form. So yeah, there's something really intriguing about the idea of the garden as a liminal space. But it's also, I always identify liminal spaces as they also have like a component of eeriness and uncanniness to them. Do you think the garden has that?
I do, and I was thinking about like applying the garden to different genres of, especially like looking at role-playing games, obviously. And I think if you are bringing a garden into your game as a featured location, you have to be aware of, there's a reason that this goes well with wizardry or the slightly mad science that Abelia Prem is doing in this module. Because, okay, so for fantasy, you've got magic and herbs and potions. Fine. For action-based genres, there's the fun of just destroying orderly things. It's like the appeal of the Godzilla movie. A gunfight in a carefully managed hedge maze is way more fun than one just in some trees because you're seeing this stuff destroyed. Yeah. So that's fun. But I think it is that horror and sci-fi and just general sense of wonder and eeriness atmosphere where gardens really come into their own, because they are, as we've said, they're sort of inherently unnatural. If it was natural, it wouldn't be a garden. And there is this implication of, well, a couple of things. So the idea of things being collected and contained. So we always have that idea of, what if someone did that with people or with beings that can think? And also the idea of deliberately cultivating something, when you grow, or actually I don't really know how bonsai works, but I know it's to do with shaping the growth of these little trees or how you crossbreed roses. This idea of transformation and control and weird sort of Lovecraftian heredity themes as well. That's all kind of in there in the subtext. If you want to just have a fun action scene, you should also be aware that actually weird plants and stuff have an underlying subtext of creepiness that you might not want.
Yeah.
But if you do want it, then this is ideal stuff,
I live in a very hot, dry place, and we don't have a lot of beautiful native flora, really. There's some parts of Texas that do, bluebonnets or whatever. But in general, though, what people will sometimes do to have something like a garden is they'll have Texas wildflower gardens. And setting aside the fact that it's essentially just weeds, in my opinion. Like you just took a bunch of weeds and and you made a flower bed of weeds. There is something intriguing to me about the idea of wildflowers, but contained in a box. Yeah. And as I think on it, it's not just eerie. It's kind of bleak in a way. There's a bleakness to it.
It is a bit. It's like, this is the best we can do. Yeah.
Or like here's this thing growing wild and free, and we're gonna imprison it.
That's true. I mean, there is a sort of optimistic version of that, though. I remember being on the Lanzarote, one of the Canary Islands, which is mostly covered in volcanic ash from a century of eruptions that happened in the 1800s. And people live there because you can grow stuff. But gardens are almost non-existent. And yet you will see gardens that are mostly just black cinders that have been raked in a way slightly reminiscent of a Zen garden with one cactus with a very colourful flower on it in the middle of it. And it's sort of, in a way, there's like, we can't grow anything really, but we're going to do this. And it's quite nice in its own way. I don't know how that helps us with the games, but it is nice. No. One other thing I want to mention, though, is there's the duality of the garden. So this is a theme that in real life, I want to say this is like an 18th and 19th century trend that was amongst sort of European nobility, which is the idea of apothecary gardens, which of course have a very long history of plants that have medicinal purposes. Sure. That's what we see Abelia Prem doing in her experiments. But also, and this is the fun one, the poison garden, as seen in one of the more racist Bond novels, which is saying something. But the reason that they would have poison gardens was not to create death traps for James Bond, although that's a very fine endeavour, but to kind of, the same way you get anti-venom from the venom of a snake, you get cures for things from a poisonous plant. And with that, I would like to introduce, I think this is a first for our podcast, a quote from William Shakespeare, which is Friar Lawrence's discourse on plants in Romeo and Juliet. Within the infant rind of this weak flower, poison hath residence and medicine power. For this being smelt with that part cheers each part. Being tasted, stays all senses with the heart. Two such opposed kings encamp them still, in man as well as herbs, grace and rude will. And where the worser is predominant, full soon the canker death eats up that plant. And so what he's saying here is that in plants as in people, and this is again how we get to fun things like themes, both good and evil or harm and healing reside. Yeah. And if you want to go full on metaphorical, you can start to have things like flower knights combating each other and so on, because it's like the whole thing is a metaphor for other things. But yeah, I think it's not just that it's an unnatural space, but also that it is two things seemingly opposed at the same time. And it's about how you apply the things that you find in that environment to determine the outcomes.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I do think that is the first Shakespeare reference on Fear of a Black Dragon.
Yeah, so probably. but it won't be the last, listener. Don't worry.
No, we're all in on Shakespeare now, listeners. So let's talk about the idea of the garden as a world unto itself. I think our conversation up to this point has been focusing on this idea of the garden as a liminal space, the garden as a reflection of the owner's personality. But what about the idea of the garden being its own little world and ecosystem? Because this is something that's really important in fantasy, right?
Yeah, that's good as well. It's that sort of like the Borgesian library kind of thing, like maybe the eternal garden that's sealed off from the rest of the world. Yeah. And again, that is very powerful. But I think, to me, that theme has the idea that, I don't know, maybe it's just my own prejudices and reading history, but to me that always has this idea of it being a wishful thinking. You have a secret garden, you think you can seal yourself off, but normally you actually can't, because you always bring something with you into the garden. But I do think that's a great idea. This sort of where the garden becomes either a reflection of almost like a Dreamlands kind of environment sometimes, if you have this sort of infinite garden, and then if it's really just a bubble that is a retreat. But I think it always has to have this idea of cutting yourself off from an outside world that exists, I think, right? There has to be something beyond the garden, otherwise it's just the world. Is that right? I'm not really sure where I'm going with this.
No, I get it. That's very interesting. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, okay, getting down to brass tacks, what are some practical applications of all of these thoughts to the adventuring context? Either if you were writing a garden-based module, or if you were taking a sudden, unexpected diversion into a garden and the GM has to think of something really quickly. What are some key things? I think the idea of like the garden as a place for fantasy herbology potion needs is probably really important.
Yeah.
But what are some other thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a lost world narrative. So like building on that idea of you're trying to shut out another world. I don't think you would want to have like a campaign setting or a world that where it is just a garden. That to me kind of doesn't make sense in a way. You'd always want to find the edges and break out. But whether you're, for example, seeking a lost garden that has a magic apple in it, that would be one thing, because you're trying to find this hidden place that someone has cut off from outside. Or if you're inside the garden, where it's maybe a world of stasis, because that's often the idea, isn't it? It's an unchanging place in a world that it keeps changing, but you would eventually want to break out. I think it's a bit like the thing of whenever I play something like Apocalypse World, you're being the hard holder or the one who owns a bar. I always want that to be on the verge of collapse. I never want it to be thriving and unchanging. I always want it to be or, either up and coming or collapsing. I don't want it to be just stuck in one place, even though that is the dream, I think, of the garden creator, right? You want your garden to be perfect and unchanging, but actually the fun stuff is when it isn't, when it all starts to fray at the edges and disappear. Yeah, I think that's what you want to aim for.
How interesting that whenever we have a situation where civilization withdraws for whatever reason, maybe the castle's destroyed and the people are driven out of it and it's left abandoned, or a plague affects this city and everyone's dead, or whenever we have a place where people are driven out, the infrastructure, all that stuff falls apart. But when a garden is abandoned, it doesn't recede or fall apart. It grows.
Yes.
It gets bigger, which I find really fascinating. I don't know what the application of that is, but I just think it's intriguing.
That is interesting.
On like a different level, there's this idea of the garden, and like you've noted, like this idea of hubris connected to it. There's this idea of, in making this an orderly space, in trying to control nature, I'm actually diminishing it.
Yeah.
And furthermore, in the fantasy context, I'm making it angry.
Yes.
And so I think that's an important idea. And I think that's what makes the Abelia Prem module so interesting. Abelia Prem's been gone for a while. We don't know where she's at. Her workers are all gone. The servants are all gone.
Yeah.
And the plants and the animals, and they're just kind of doing their thing, right?
Yeah.
they're still going, and their magic is just running wild, And I think that's that's an important idea when we think about like gardens in the fantasy context. It's almost always going to be like an abandoned situation, and in the case of a garden, everything else is falling apart, but the garden is thriving.
Yes, the garden's taking over,
expanding. Yeah.
Nice.
It's interesting. So interesting. Any other thoughts on gardens?
I think that's it from me.
All right. Well, then let's go to companion adventures.
All right.
It's the companion adventures. Got a few things here. Mine are mostly books, so
okay,
I'll do mine.
Yeah, you go first.
Perhaps an obvious pick, but I really love The Secret Garden, both the book and its multiple adaptations into film or TV. I will always watch a Secret Garden thing, and I've read The Secret Garden several times, and I'm recommending it not just because of gardens, but in particular this idea of the garden as a liminal space. Now here, obviously, we're not in a fantasy context, but we are in this context of the liminality being so many different things. It's rich and poor, it's young and old, it's healthy and unhealthy. I think it's between the wars, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember when it was written.
I think so, yeah.
So the idea of like the garden and the secret garden being this liminal space, it's very pronounced in that book. My other two book recs are for crumbling old Gothic manors. We have the 2023 Riley Sager novel, The Only One Left. Very easy to spoil because that's Riley Sager. I don't know if you're familiar with Riley Sager, but his whole thing is plot twists, plot twist, plot twist, plot twist. There's like 50 plot twists in a row. Yeah, and it's just he's constantly plot twisting until you're done. But this one is a plot twist book about a crumbling old Gothic manor. It's enjoyable. It's good. They're always a fast read. And then I think I've recommended this in another context, but Mexican Gothic, the 2020 book by Silvia Garcia Moreno, apart from being a really fantastic book, it's just a terrific read. It's a really, really good depiction of a crumbling old English country manor in Mexico. So.
Interesting. Speaking of English manners, my recommendation is a place that, well, if you're in the north of England near the border with Scotland, you can visit it in person. Otherwise, you can look it up on the internet. It is the Duchess of Northumberland's Poison Garden, which is at Alnwick Castle.
Sounds great.
Yeah, Alnwick's at ALN.
Sounds like a Dragon magazine article.
It is. Yeah, and it's like, I think it is originally planted by some predecessors of hers in the 1800s, maybe. And you can go and look at all these deadly plants, some of which you genuinely, I think, can't touch because they're that deadly. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and lots of fun inspiration and visuals and planty words for you to use if you're running a poison garden adventure. And my final rec is a film from 1962, directed by Louis Buñuel. That's the guy who did Chien Andalou with Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
And it's called The Exterminating Angel. And this is got very hard to describe. It's sort of about a dinner party at a manor house kind of place where the guests discover that they're trapped inside the dining room by a kind of invisible force field. Well, not just the dining room. Anyway, that's not important. Animals can go in and out, and they're stuck in there. And then gradually, of course, the food starts to run out, and they begin to panic. And the whole thing's very weird, but also it's not like a horror movie. It's just unsettling and odd in a way that I think is suitable for the Stygian Garden module. And God, it's a weird film. I've got to watch it again though. It's
he was the David Lynch of his day, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
He was doing that way before David Lynch was.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, that is our show. Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Gauntlet RPG. And we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. And thanks, of course, to our evergreen editor, Rich Rogers, and to you, the listener, for listening. Take care.
Take care.